All right. Thank you so much for hanging with me as we move through these slides. I know this is a very long flipped classroom, especially in comparison to the Indian Ocean Basin, but this chapter is very, very important for this time period as a whole, not only because this is a new class or a new religion, but also because Islam expands trade so much, and that links it to the Indian Ocean Basin. So having this chapter be so long is going to explain why trade is so much larger during this time period. And that's a big deal because two of the key concepts in your key concept packet focus on trade. Okay, so back to this whole idea of the Dar al-Islam. Again, the last video focused on how this was a huge trading zone that increased trade and was fluid in terms of religion, and that's really important too. But here we're focusing on trade. Okay, so one big part of this expansion of trade was banking houses. You know, when you go to your local branch at Wells Fargo, you're doing something that was really, well, when we think about Wells Fargo, recently I traveled to Salt Lake City. My banking account in Minnesota is Wells Fargo. So in Utah, when I was in Salt Lake City, I didn't have to pay any fees to get cash out or to bank in Salt Lake City. That's because that banking house is connected, right? Wells Fargo has branches all across the country, and that's how we can think of these banking houses in the Islamic world. They're kind of like a Wells Fargo of that time period. They make banking easier. Okay. So if I am a merchant and I get credit in one city, let's say on the Swahili coast, I can then cash in that credit in another city. And the vehicle I'm going to use to do that is a check, right? So I have credit. I have basically trust that I'm going to pay for this good or service or expansion of business. Now, why is that important? The reason that's important is because it can increase volume of trade. Because I don't need to have all of the capital that all of the money that I need right there. I can borrow it, right? I can borrow it, therefore take advantage of an opportunity, and then use that advantage to then sell those additional goods. So banking houses are really important, number one, for credit. Number two, it's easier to settle accounts, because you don't have to be in the city that you took out a loan in, or you don't have to be in the city that you bank in. You can do those transactions in other cities, just like I could when I traveled. This invention of the check, huge change, right? This is basically the invention of credit, right? This idea that this slip of paper stands for something and you can trust it. The other thing that the Dar al-Islam did was it brought together groups of merchants who would create what we would think of as companies that distributed risk. So if I had a really great venture or idea in cotton, but it was going to require me to spend beaucoup bucks to get this venture underway. Let's say I wanted to start a new cotton cloth distribution, or like I wanted to create more cotton cloth to get it on the market. Instead of just putting all of the money I have into that project, I could spread the risk around and bring in more of my colleagues so that we all could, number one, benefit from the booming business that I hope to create, but also if the business goes under, I don't lose everything. I only lose a little bit. So the risks are less scary, and the reward is, although I'm not making quite as much, I'm still making something. The other thing that's really interesting is that Sharia law had large protections for merchants. and also bankers. Hopefully later on in the year we'll talk about how Islamic banking is different than Western banking because you can't charge interest. There's um, it's there's a rule that you can't charge interest. You can't make money off of nothing, off of someone paying you back. That is considered immoral. So the Western philosophy and style of banking is not conducive with Sharia law. So Islamic banks don't charge interest. They have other fees for holding your money. All right, the other thing I told you, camels were really important. The camel saddle was perfected during this time period. Camels were used to cross areas of the world that were very desolate. The camel is an amazing animal, and that, they don't need a lot of water. They're really tall. No, they're pretty cool. So these camel caravans were used extensively in both the Sahara Desert and also in Central Asia. And everywhere the camels were, there were inns set up, caravanserai, and we will look at these in a reading with the Seljuks. The Seljuks created an extensive network of caravanserai, and so we're going to extensively study those there. For now, just understand that they are inns that travelers could stay at that also offered protection, that were sponsored usually by the government. They had food, music, entertainment, everything you could want as a traveler, and mainly protection from thieves and such. Okay, during this time period, the Islamic presence in Europe is felt with the Al-Andalus, I don't know if I'm saying that right, sorry, Mr. Smalling, in Spain. Their capital is Cordoba. They're on the Iberian Peninsula, which is where Spain is today. Sometimes people forget about that. If we talk about Iberian Muslims, or if we talk about Al-Andalus, it's all the same thing. The Iberian Peninsula is Spain and Portugal today. Their biggest cities were Cordoba, Seville, and Toledo, and these were places where Europeans could go to see how far the rest of the world was coming. While Europe was in this middle time period, really sectioned off in feudal states, the rest of the world was expanding and participating in trade at a much greater rate. And so these areas were really artistically, intellectually, they were preserving philosophy. They were looking at Aristotle. We'll look at this in a second. And they integrated science, like they had, lit walkways where the rest of Europe was not doing that at all. The city was a pretty scary place to be. So we're going to look at that in a little bit here, and you can also learn about in the video Islam Empire of Faith from PBS. The Great Mosque in Cordoba is the legacy of that. It's now a Catholic church because of the Reconquista, which ended in 1493, but it began its life as a mosque. Okay, next we're going to look at women in the Dar al-Islam, and I think I'll save these last three concepts for the last flipped classroom. Again, thank you for hanging with me through these flipped classrooms. It is going to be worth it in the end.